Okay, so now I'm going to get to the parenting. So when we're talking about parenting these parts, so these are all objects, and they're objects because we are working in three-dimensional space. Okay. So each of these things are not shapes anymore, right? Because we can see underneath them, around them. They are objects. And we're wanting to parent them so that we can move the limbs, right? We sort of have this robot in a default pose where you see the arms extended out. They sort of begin to call this sort of a T pose. There are other default poses, but this is one that is definitely something that has been used for decades um, as a default pose. And so I'm not modeling the robot in the stance that I wanted to have or the position I wanted to have. I'm just modeling it with the objects I want to use to build it, and then I can position it once I begin to parent it and animate it. Okay, so we need to parent it so that we can animate it. Again, I want you to know that we're using these spheres to animate this object, but we could have used the skeleton system that Maya has. I just find that this is a nice, simple way to start off. That's the only reason why we're using it. Okay, so I have to think about parenting. And so remember with parenting, whatever, with a parent, wherever the parent goes, remember the child will follow. Okay, so if while you're listening to this, you begin to move your neck back and forth, notice that your head moves, right? So notice how I said if you move your neck back and forth. If you move your head back and forth, what do you think is making is it that your head is rotating on, right? So that's a joint, right? And that's your neck. If you moved your arm, if I said, move your arm up and down, and you just tried, you might notice that your elbow is really what's making that all happen. Your elbow, did I say your elbow? Your shoulder is really what's making all of that happen if you move your arm. So that elbow, that arm, that shoulder becomes um, a major parent. And you being able to move your arm, you need that shoulder joint. Okay. That shoulder, when you move that shoulder, even if you shrug your shoulder, notice that your upper arm, your elbow, your lower arm, your wrist, your hand, when you move that shoulder, just to shrug your shoulder, all of that, your whole arm moves with you, including your hand, because that shoulder joint is apparent. And it's apparent to all of those things, all of that whole arm, that whole limb. Okay. The same happens with your hip. So we're going to go over parenting. So objects now. So again, remember the premise is wherever the parent go, the child must follow. So we know that with the example of the shoulder joint, that the shoulder is the parent of all of those things that are moving when the shoulder moves, right? So wherever that parent goes, the child will follow. So let's talk about how to parent in Maya. Again, you need that wonderful 3-button mouse, and you need it set up. But when I start with my head, I know that my neck joint is going to be what the parent of my head. So in order to parent it, and again, there's multiple ways to do this in Maya. I like to keep it simple where you're not clicking on other windows, such as the hypergraph window. I like to just keep it an outliner because you're already using it. So I need to middle mouse button click. So watch me do this more than once before you try it. So I'm here, I've selected it, but I'm going to middle mouse button click it now. And I want you to notice that box that we see around it, that little white box, that becomes really important because if you only see a line, that's not going to work. So how you see that one line above it, you want to see the actual white line going around that blue box. And then you're going to middle, because you're already clicking on the middle mouse button, because I haven't stopped. I kept my finger has been on there and it's still on there. And as I move it, I'm going to move it right on top of the neck joint. Again, I have my finger on the middle mouse button. It has not moved. I've kept it there. Even while I move the mouse down to the neck joint. And then I release that middle mouse button, and we see what happens here. The neck joint now has a plus sign. See how none of the other objects have the plus sign? The neck joint now has the plus sign, and when I click on it, I see that head underneath, which is very important. And it's a great time now to check to make sure that the neck and the head are moving properly. And by that, I'm going to use my rotate tool. So I've clicked on the neck joint and I'm rotating it, right? And see how the head comes with it? Yes. So now that with the neck is the parent to the head, I'm going to hit undo. Now the neck is the parent to the head. And whenever I click on that neck joint and I rotate, the head will follow. Okay? So I'm going to undo that movement just to keep it simple. If I use the move tool, then my head would move off my body. And I don't really want to do that. So that's why I use the rotation tool. Okay. So now I have two objects together, and I have them parented, right? The neck is the parent of the head. I'm going to go down to my limbs, right? So you saw how I moved down from all of this and I went straight to my shoulder. So I'm at my right shoulder. So I gave the example already of that shrug that you can do yourself. Try to shrug your right shoulder and notice all of the limbs, all of the parts of your limb that come with you, that follow that shrug. That's what we're getting ready to parent. So we have, and some joints will be a child and a parent. So I'm going to show you that. But I want you to remember, if it doesn't say a joint, it's not going to be a parent. Okay? The only thing in this case that's going to be a parent are going to be joints. So you don't ever have to wonder if the chest is going to be a parent. No, it's not. The pelvis is never going to be a parent. If you don't see joint, the upper arm is never going to be a parent, right? The lower arm is never going to be a parent, right? So wherever you see joint, you know that has potential to be a parent. It might be a parent and a child, but it can be a parent. So I'm going to show you an example of that now. So I have my shoulder joint, my right shoulder joint, and I'm going to go ahead and get my right upper arm. There it is. And I'm a middle mouse button click and bring it right on top. See that line when it's like that? That's not what I want. If I click now, and I'll click now so you can see, it just brought the right upper arm on top of the shoulder. And I don't want that. So I'm gonna click on middle mouse button, click on it again and drop it. And you see that whole rectangle shape that's outlining in white around the right shoulder joint. That's what I want. And when I let go of the middle mouse button, it's underneath. You see that little L that happens right there? Right there? That tells me that upper arm is now a child of that shoulder. And it does help. I do strongly recommend that as you're doing the parenting, that you check. And notice I am undoing that movement. So I will always hit my Z to undo that movement right now, just to kind of keep it in the format that it was in, so it's not wiggling and moving around as I'm doing it. But I always check. Now, if I had gotten some popping or my sphere changed from being that perfectly round shape to being oblong, that's when I know, uh-oh, I did something wrong. My parenting is probably off. Okay. But there, my joint looks good. It doesn't look oblong. So I have my upper arm now, the child of my shoulder. Now, I want to show you an instance when a joint is going to be a child and a parent. So when we have our right elbow, well, we know when we did our shrug of our own limb, that elbow followed that shoulder. So we know that elbow is a parent, right? I mean, is a child. of that shoulder, right? Because when we move our shoulder, our elbow comes with us, right? But that elbow, while it's a child of the shoulder, it's also a parent, and it's going to be the parent of the lower arm. So I click on my lower arm and I put it over my right elbow joint. Okay, and now we see that there's a plus sign right next to my right elbow joint. That is very important that you see. So when I click on it, we see that the lower arm is a child of my right elbow. It's also a child of the shoulder, right? Because all of this is fitting underneath the shoulder. Okay, so the elbow is a child of the shoulder and the parent of the lower arm. Okay, remember that lower arm is not a joint too. So now that elbow joint, when we look at the right wrist joint, is also going to be the parent to that, here we go, to that elbow. Okay, so again, when we want to test this, since everything is being parented right now to the main shoulder, we can see that that's moving very well, right? I'm gonna undo that movement, but we know now that the elbow is also a parent, and we see how that is moving our lower arm and our wrist. You see our hand is just sort of sitting there because we haven't parented it yet. But it's always good to check. Again, if your spheres, look closely at your spheres, if your spheres start looking oblong or like an egg shape, you got to go back to your parenting. And once you get that oblong egg shape, most of the time, to be quite frank, it's better to just delete that egg shape and start with a new sphere, just so that you know you have it perfectly rounded, because we're relying on these spheres to work properly to move the object. And if it's oblong, it's not going to work well. Okay. So I tend to just use these for now. Again, if you just do what I'm doing, you're going to be just fine. Okay. So now I have my right hand. Now we have the elbow joint that is the parent of the lower arm, and the right and the wrist joint, right? So the wrist is a joint. And when I middle mouse button click on my hand, I'm gonna drag it right on top of that wrist joint. Again, notice that white rectangular shape going around that right wrist joint. Okay. And again, we see that plus sign, and it's right on the right wrist joint. And I see that inside of that plus sign is that right hand. So I know that I have parented it correctly. Okay, so this is a really good example of us parenting, right? So we're parenting the shoulder joint, the right shoulder joint is the main parent. Look what happens when I click on that minus sign, becomes a plus, and all of those objects are inside of that shoulder joint, okay? Because the shoulder joint was the main parent. And we see that that main parent of the right shoulder is also the parent to the upper arm. It's a parent to the elbow joint. And then that elbow joint is the parent to the lower arm and the wrist joint. And that wrist joint is a parent to the hand. Okay. And so again, I can close it. So I see that plus sign, or open it so I can see all of that. What's very important is that you make sure that you are parenting it correctly so that you'll get the movement. Now, if you got it wrong the first time, that's okay. Just do it again. Okay, just do it again. That's sometimes how you learn. I always tell people to be patient when you're first learning a robust piece of software like Maya. Give yourself a break. Take your time. Okay, take your time. Okay, so you can see that now I can move that arm. So I'm going to do the same work on my left side, right? So I start with my left shoulder. I know I need that upper arm. Remember that middle mouse button click, and I put it in there. I'm going to open it up so I can see. I have my left elbow. I put it in there. And then when I get to my lower arm, I put that inside of my elbow. Open that up so I can see it. And I go to my wrist, my left wrist, and I put that inside of my left elbow. There we go. And then my left hand, I put that inside of my left wrist. Okay, so it's the same that I just did for my right. And of course, as you go, please remember to check. I would check here first, meaning in the outliner before I move the object, because if you can see it here, then you won't destroy your joint if you made a mistake. You can see it there and correct it before you do the movements. But once you do the movements, as I said, your goal is to keep these beautiful spheres, but if they become oblong or egg-shaped or something, you're going to have to take them out and delete them and put in another sphere, polygon sphere. Okay, so now I have both sides, my left side and my right side of my shoulder joints or my full arms. You can see we did the neck joint, right? So now I'm going to go to the legs. So I'm starting with my hips. So these are the limbs. We have our arms and we have our legs. Okay. So I'm going to go from my left side. I'm going to go and bring in that knee joint right on top of my hip. Okay. So this is going to be very similar to the arms. I'm going to do my thighs. So my left thigh, I'm going to bring it right inside of my hip. So we see that I have a knee joint and I have the thigh, right? And again, you want to check here first and then go, okay, how does it move, right? The reason why I say again for you to check the outliner first is to just make sure that it's visibly, like you can tell on the outliner is correct. And if you believe it's correct, then when you move it, it should move correctly. However, if it doesn't, it means that you did something wrong here. So now I'm going to my my left lower leg, and that's going to go inside of my knee joint, right? Just like that elbow, that's my my knee, and my knee is going to move my lower leg, and I'm going to get that left ankle and put that inside of my knee joint. And I'm also going to get my left foot and put that inside of my ankle joint, right? So it should, if you got the arm part, then this should sort of feel a little bit more comfortable to you, but if it doesn't, it's okay. That's why I did it in video so that you can watch it. You can comment, put comments in, ask me questions, or email me directly, whatever you need. I want to definitely support you. Beginning to learn a robust piece of software step by step takes a minute, and you have to sort of give yourself a little time to learn it and be patient with yourself. Okay. And so there we go. So I'm just checking, just as I was before, see how this side is not jointed, is it parented versus how all of this side is. So I did my left side, and now I'm going to do my right side. I have my hip joint. We know that that's the leading parent. And we're going to take that thigh, that middle mouse button click, put it in the joint, the knee joint, right in there. The lower leg goes into the knee joint, and then the ankle goes into the knee joint. And then the foot goes into the ankle joint. And there we have it. So I also want to show you how to unparent. So this was me parenting, middle mouse button click and drop it on top. If I wanted to unparent, made a mistake or something, I'm going to middle mouse button click on it, and I'm going to come up and put a line here. See that line again? It's not the same as that whole rectangular box, but if I move it slightly up, I get that line, and that allows me to take it out, right? So now that's an independent thing. I can click on delete once I have it selected and delete it. Um, but now it's independent. So I can click on it now and go and put it back in because that is where I wanted it. But if you make a mistake and need to unparent it, so to speak, you can unparent it by clicking on it and middle mouse button clicking and then just drag it up and use that line as a guide instead of the rectangular, right? Lose that line, it takes you out. I can click on the middle mouse button, click on it again and drop it in and I'm fine. Okay, so you can also, and I'm not going to tell you a whole lot of you can also, but here's some unparenting here too, if you want to unparent that way. I recommend just using what I just showed. Okay, so now we have our shoulders parented, we have our hips parented, we have our neck parented. So now we're going to go about the business of doing our cores. So we have our upper body core. So the upper body should include our shoulders. So I'm going to select both of these at the same time. So I select one and I'm going to hold down the shift key on my keyboard to select both. And then I'm going to middle mouse button click and drop it right on top of my upper core joint. Okay, so now my shoulders are there. I'm also going to click on my neck joint, which has my head. And I'm going to hold down the shift to select the chest. I want to select both of those at the same time. Middle mouse button click and put it right on top of my upper. So that allows me, if I've done it correctly, so always check here first, check and make sure yours matches this. That means that once I've done that, I can click on that upper core joint and rotate it just like that. And that's a nice way of working. Okay, so now I can move that whole upper body with just one upper core joint. Okay, I can still move the parts independently, like the shoulder. I can still move it independently, but this allows me to move the whole thing, including the chest and everything else. And when we start talking about positioning or animating, I can do that. So I'm gonna undo that to get it back in the spot. Okay, so now I've done that. So I have my upper core joints together. I'm going to do my lower core. My lower core, click on the left hip, hold down the shift key, click on the right hip. That's how I got them both. Middle mouse button click and drag it right on top of the lower core. And it's right there. So I have the two hips together. But I also want to bring my pelvis. Middle mouse button click and drop it right in there. So we see what's inside of the upper core joint, right? You see all the components of that as well as the lower core joint. And I'll click on the lower core joint and do a rotate so that you can kind of see what that does. And then I'm going to select both the upper and lower core joints, middle mouse button click, and bring it all into that core joint. Okay, so that everything can move all at once. I can even use my move tool with it, right? Okay. So that's everything parented now. So notice these are the reasons why I kept this so simple, because there's a lot of moving parts and we wanted to get it right. So I'm going to unpack all of this so that you can see it. So I'm going to unpack all of this and then scroll it so that you can see it to help you. I mean, you can always pause the video, but just so that you could also screenshot it as well. So I'm going to unpack all of it first. And then I'm just gonna first go leave it here so you can see it, right? It's a great one to screenshot, right? And then I'm gonna scroll it now so that you can see the bottom of it. Okay, this allows you to screenshot it so that you can copy it exactly the way I have it, or you can keep the video on while you're doing it too. Okay, so that's why I'm sort of slowing it down just so that you can see this and go, okay, got to get it the same way this is done. Yes, you do. And you can do it. That you can definitely do this. But please remember to be patient with yourselves. It's easy to make a mistake. You've seen me even make a couple of oopsies and I've had to go, oops. But it's easy, especially when you're first starting out. You just want to be really positive with yourself and know that you're going to be patient while you learn something. Because remember, if you were teaching it to somebody else, you would be patient, probably more patient than you are to yourself. Okay, so now we have everything jointed. And even if I click the core joint, everything will collapse inside of it because it's the main core joint. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is go into animating and doing just a very simple animation. Okay, just so that you guys have all the components. All right.